Hello, God bless from Up Ministries. It's me, Dick Jr. I am coming to you today to read you Acts chapter 27. Now, I prayed and I asked God to help me to speak with you today before I started this video. And I suggest that anytime you place yourself in God's Word that you pray also and that you ask Him for knowledge, wisdom, and understanding specifically, just like I do. He's going to give them to you. That's His promise, and it's in this book in many places. You go looking for it. But the reason why He wants us to understand is because He wants us to know about the perfect plan to salvation through His Son, Jesus Christ, which is contained in this book. Okay, everything we need to know about salvation is in here. So, that being said, let's get started here in Acts chapter 27. Yes. And when it was decided that we would sail for Italy, they proceeded to deliver Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. And embarking in an Adramyttian ship, which was about to sail to the regions along the coast of Asia, we put out to sea, accompanied by Aristarchus and Macedonia of Thessalonica. The next day we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul with consideration and allowed him to go to his friends and receive care. From there we put out to sea and sailed under the shelter of Cyprus, because the winds were contrary. And when we had sailed through the sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we landed at Myra and Lycia. There the centurion found an Alexandrian ship sailing for Italy, and he put us aboard it. And when we had sailed slowly for a good many days, and with difficulty had arrived off Cnidus, since the wind did not permit us to go further, we sailed under the shelter of Crete off Salamone. And with difficulty, sailing past it, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lasea. When considerable time had passed, the voyage was now dangerous, since even the fast was already over. Paul began to admonish them, and said to them, Men, I perceive that the voyage will certainly be in damage and great loss, not only of cargo and the ship, but also of our lives. I'm going to pause right there for just a second. But if you follow this whole book and Paul and the whole thing, and as he goes through all these things, you're going to understand that Paul spent a lot of time around oceans and seas and folks who, you know what I mean, and he took ships. And so he knew a little bit about this. So when he said this, it may or may not have been according to God or the Spirit. That's why it says it this way. But he knew what he was talking about. That's the point of it. So, as we go on. But the centurion was more persuaded by the pilot and the captain of the ship than by what was being said by Paul. Because the harbor was not suitable for wintering, the majority reached a decision to put out to sea from there. If somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, facing southwest and northwest, to spend the winter there. When a moderate south wind came up, supposing that they had attained their purpose, they weighed anchor and began sailing along Crete, close inshore. But before very long there rushed down from the land a violent wind called Iraquilo. And when the ship was caught in it, and could not face the wind, we gave way to it, and let ourselves be driven along. Running under the shelter of a small island called Clauda, we were scarcely able to get the ship's boat under control. After they had hoisted it up, they used support cables in undergirding the ship, and fearing that they might run aground in the shallows of Syrtis, they let down the sea anchor, and in this way let themselves be driven along. The next day, as we were being violently storm-tossed, they began to jettison the cargo, and on the third day they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. Since neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small storm was assailing us, from then on all hope of our being saved was gradually abandoned. And when they had gone a long time without food, then Paul stood up in their midst and said, Men, ye ought to have followed my advice, and not have set sail from Crete, and incurred this damage and loss. Yet now I urge you to keep up your courage, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night an angel of God, to whom I belong, and whom I serve, stood before me, saying, "Do not be afraid, Paul. You must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all those who are sailing with you. Therefore, keep up your courage, men, for I believe God that it will turn out exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on a certain island." But when the 14th night came, as we were being driven about in the Adriatic Sea, about midnight the sailors began to surmise that they were approaching some land. They took soundings and found it to be 20 fathoms, and a little further on they took another sounding and found it to be 15 fathoms. Fearing that they might run aground somewhere on the rocks, they cast 4 anchors from the stern and wished for daybreak. So now there's 5 anchors from the stern, and they're trying to stop the ship. Okay. But as the sailors were trying to escape from the ship and had let down the ship's boat into the sea on the pretense of intending to lay out anchors from the bow, so what they did is they laid 5 out and left the ship stuck. Then they let down the boat. The sailors jumped in the boat and started going towards where they knew the land was. Okay, with the boat, knowing that they wouldn't run aground, that they'd probably be at the shore safe alone. So they were abandoning the whole boat and everybody on it, in a way. So anyway, from the bow, Paul said to the centurion and to the soldiers, "Unless these men remain in the ship, you yourselves cannot be saved." Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship's boat and let it fall away. So now they trusted Paul. Why? Because he warned them this was going to happen, and it happened. And now he's trying to tell them how to get out of it. You see what I mean? So he had earned their trust. Okay. Until the day was about to dawn, Paul was encouraging them all to take some food, saying, "Today is the 14th day that you have been constantly watching and going without eating, having taken nothing. Therefore I encourage you to take some food, for this is for your preservation. For not a hair from the head of any of you will perish." Having said this, he took bread and gave thanks to God in the presence of all, and he broke it and began to eat. And all of them were encouraged, and they themselves also took food. All of us in the ship were 276 persons. And when they had eaten enough, they began to lighten the ship by throwing out the wheat into the sea. When day came, they could not recognize the land, but they did observe a bay with a beach, and they resolved to drive the ship onto it if they could. And casting off the anchors, they left them in the sea. And while at the same time they were loosening the ropes of the rudders and hoisting the foresail to the wind, then they were heading for the beach. But striking a reef where 2 seas met, they ran the vessel aground, and the prow stuck fast and remained immovable. But the stern began to be broken up by the force of the waves. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners so that none of them would swim away and escape. But the centurion, wanting to bring Paul safely through, because he brought them safely through, kept them from their intention, and commanded that those who could swim should jump overboard first and get to land, and the rest should follow, some on planks and other on various things from the ship. And so it happened that they all were brought safely to land. And that is all I have for Acts chapter 27. Thanks for listening. God bless.